So if we change this around to don't enable that, and we say we configure the enable authenticate or the authorization or the enable authentication method, and we say when the users wants to get privilege level 15 access, I'm gonna first go to the attack server to grab the privilege level, and of course if the attack server fails, I'm gonna fall back on the local database. So this is a much better way to use it. It's recommended to use this one if you want fallback, while it's recommended to use the other option if you want no fallback. Like for example, you could have a security policy which states that if the attack server is down, nobody should get exec access. So in that point, you could use that option in there, which means you're gonna be able to get direct privilege level 15 access, or you can use this option in here, likewise, but don't fall back on the local database. So it's up to you. The main difference between using this option to get shell access via the enable authentication from the attack server. So no local fallback, no fallback on the local database. The difference between this use case or saying that I want you directly get level 15 access. So that's first option, option number one, which this means per this configuration now, it means that to get level 15 access, you have to use the enable authentication method. The attacker server is going to tell the ASA if you're allowed to get level 15 or not. The second option would be to go in here and click enable and use the remote server option, which this means that to get level 15 access, you don't need to use the enabled authentication as long as the ASA server is configured to give you privilege level to begin with. So now the main difference between these two options, in the end both of them achieve the same thing, but the first option forces the user to do one more authentication via the enable authentication. The second option just gives access to level 15, of course assuming that the ASA server is configured for that. So depending on what you want to achieve, you can choose in between in there, option A, option 1, or option 2, this being option number 2. So I'm going to use the enable option with a fallback on the local database, because for example what I want is that if the ASA server is down, if the attacker server is down, to be able to still get level 15 access to configure the ASA via the local database. So I want to be able to fall back on the local database of users to be able to manage the ASA. So again, there is no one best option to use, and in general there is no one best thing to do. It depends what you want to achieve. So now let's use this option apply. Actually, it's something very misleading in here, because I didn't look properly. This is for command access authorization. It makes sense because this is the authorization tab. So let me rephrase what I said before. If you want to get level 15 access, you have one option to enable exec. So in the GUI, that's for the command authorization there. So if you want to get privilege level 15 access, you have one option as we did before to enable exec authorization on the ASA. Click enable and do it either via the remote server, TACACS, or via the local server. You cannot do a fallback. That's one option. And as soon as you authenticate, you're going to get assigned the level as configured on the remote server in the authorization part. Or if you fall back on the local data, or if you use the local database, it means the privilege level assigned to the user in the local database. That's one option. The second option is that you go to authentication and enable the enable authentication method in here, which means users from privilege level 1 are going to use the enable method to get access to level 15. And in here, you can choose to go at the TACAC server and then on the fallback on the local database if the server fails. Of course, if you don't do the fallback in here, it means that to get level 15 access, you need to use the enabled authentication method, and that can only work via the TACAC server. So if the server is down, you cannot get privilege level access to the ASA. So if you don't use the local fallback, it's the same thing like you do in here, that you enable exec authorization, you enable it, and use it via the remote server. It's the same thing. The only difference is that with this option, you get direct access to level 15 as we saw before. With the enable option, it means you have to use the enabled a second authentication method, the enable method, to get access to level 15. So let's use this method in here. Now, let's say apply. If you say show run AA, so now what I'm saying is that with this configuration, the users are going to get authenticated, the SSH users are going to get authenticated via TACAC server fallback on the local database. They're going to always get assigned a level of 1 no matter what. Let's confirm that. There we go. And now if they want privilege level 15 access, they have to use the enable method, which I'm going to send that request likewise to the TACAC server. And the users, when the users say enable, because they're going to say by default if you don't put the level, it's going to be enabled 15. Now in here, if I have to put the enable password that's configured on the TACAC server, which was TACAC's enable. TACAC's. Okay, let's make sure that was the proper password configured on the TACAC server for the enabled password. Let's go back on the user. Users. And click the user, say change password. And let's change the password to be TACAC's enable. Submit. Password has already been used. Let's say just CISCO for enable and CISCO. Submit. So let's go, and when I say enable again, which is 15, let's put CISCO in there. Let's see what doesn't work. Let's go on the ACA server. Let's go on the monitoring and reports. Go on the launch monitoring report viewer and look in the authentication logs of TACACs to see what is the problem. Let's go to favorites and to authentication TACACs today. Authentication TACACs today. So it says the last message, which states for the TACACs user, is that shield profile privilege level not configured correctly. So let's take a detailed look on that problem. So for the username of TACACs user, it says that shield profile privilege level not configured correctly. So let's go back on the TACACs server. Let's go on our access policy. Edit the authorization list. Say edit. Let's temporarily just say permit access. Say OK. Change the authorization results, save changes. Let's go back on our policy elements on shell profiles, and let's take again a look at that shell profile configured. Edit, common tasks. Okay, so at this point, let's go back to our access policy, to our default device admin authorization rule. So at this point, my incoming connection, both of my login authentication and enable authentication should match on this rule in there, which if we click on it, the shell profile just states permit access. So let's say enable again. Enable and say CISCO. And let's look again in the logs, favorites, and go to tag hacks to the authentications. And let's see what was the lag message. Requested privilege level too high, which this is correct now because I have not configured the appropriate privilege level to my authorization rule in ACS. Because the user requests a level of 15 via this command, and my authorization policy is not configured for a level of 15 in there. Let's go back on the configuration of ACS, and then now let's bind again. Let's edit our rule, and let's bind again the configure shell profile. So select, and let's say level of 15. Say OK, and OK, and save changes. Let's try again. Let's say exit SSH again, TagX user, in the login password, and then enable CISCO. Let's go again in the logs to see if it's the same error message. Favorites, TagX today, and it says shell profile privilege level not configured correctly again. Which what this means, let me go to policy elements, to my shell profile, common tasks, and let's put the maximum privilege level of static to 15 and submit. And let's enable the, let's do again now CISCO, and there we go, I got connected. And this makes sense. I wanted to show this in a different way, but it just showed up in here. I got connected, I got authenticated. Because when you configure the shell profile, let's click again on the shell profile, under common tasks. Now the default privilege level, what this means is that the level assigned when the user logs in at the login step. But what I'm trying to do on the ASA, I'm trying to do on the ASA to get privilege level access via the enable method. So this configuration in here does not control what privilege level the ACS can assign to a user via the enable option. So this is only for the login step. If you want somebody also on the iOS or on the ASA to get level 15 access via the enable method, you have to configure the maximum privilege level assigned. So this level that you put in here is the maximum level that that user can get via the enable step. So that's why it was complaining that it was misconfigured in there. Okay. So now I got access to privilege level 15 successfully. And of course, which means I can do whatever I want on the ASA. Conft interface gig01. I can do everything because no command authorization has been configured. Exit. Now let's do command authorization on the ASA. So if we go to ASDM and say refresh again, and we go to the authorization part. Now this is the step which enables authorization for commands. So I'm going to enable it. And I'm going to say I'm going to authorize all commands against the attack server with a fallback on the local database in case the attack server fails. So let's say apply. No. Now, one problem with this command, and actually I'm not going to do it, because as you can see on the ASA, this command, which is going to be pushed over to the CLI, if we go on the CLI, on ASA tree. So show run, we're going to do it in a couple. Show run include AA. One difference between the command authorization part of the ASA as opposed to the iOS is that when you say AA authorization, commands, first of all, you don't have a level, so it affects all commands on the ASA, level 0, 1, 15, or whatever other level you have put it commands to. Second of all, this command affects all, let's say, all sessions. This affects both the SDM sessions, the HTTP sessions, the SSH sessions, the console sessions. That command affects all sessions on the ASA. So if I say now to the group of attack server and with a fallback on local, once I hit enter, I should no longer get access to the ASA's console, because now all commands are going to get authorized via the attack server with fallback on local, and I am not authenticated on the ASA console at this point. So on the ASA, you have to take good care when you enable this command, because here it affects all ways. It's going to authorize all commands on the ASA. It doesn't matter from where those commands are configured on the ASA. The console, the SSH, the telnet session, the SDM session, doesn't matter. So this is dangerous to perform, of course, in my case. If I want to make sure that I'm not going to get locked out of the console, what I have to do is show run include AA. I would have to enable console authentication to begin with. I'm not going to do that. So I would have to enable console authentication as well in order to get authenticated at the console. And then all commands which I type at the console are going to get authorized against the attack server. So let's say AAA authentication. Let's enable that. Serial, which is the console via the attack server and local. And then I have to make sure that on the attack server I have a username which can get to level 15 and has access to all commands. So let's go ahead and configure that. So on the ACA server, I'm going to go and create a user in there, users. users and say add. Give it a name of full access. Password Cisco. Or let's put the username to be Cisco in there, Cisco. Submit. And I gotta make sure that I configure an access policy for which this user has full access to the ASA, not to get myself locked out of the console. So I'm gonna create a new rule First of all, I'm going to say customize, and I'm going to add a new condition to the condition of the authorization policies. Okay. I'm going to say save changes. And then I'm going to add a new rule before that rule in there, because rules are processed top down, create above. Name it like 0 rule. And I'm going to say that if the user which gets authenticated is Cisco, then likewise give level of 15 with no command authorization required. Say OK. And say save changes. Now if I disconnect from the ASA, so now console authentication is going to be done via DAC server with a fallback on local. Once I'm going to log in at the console now, I'm going to get level of 1 assigned. Then I'm going to use the enabled keyword to get 15 assigned. So let's say exit, Cisco, Cisco, enable, Cisco. So now because I got authenticated, it means I can now enable command authorization. Because once you enable command authorization on the ASA, because it's going to affect all ways of putting commands on the ASA, SSH, telnet, serial, whatever, because I got authenticated, and because on the ACS server, the configure authorization policy allows me to type all commands, I'm going to be able to successfully type all commands from the console. So now I can go on the SDM of the ASA. So you refresh now. I want to discard them. And I can successfully go on the ASA and now enable command authorization. Authorization, enable command authorization, DAC server, use local when server group fails, and say apply. Before I do this, because I'm going to lose also ASDM access, let's make sure that also ASDM is going to get authenticated via the DAC server with a fallback on local. And I'm going to disconnect from ASDM and reconnect with the Cisco user. So say apply, say send, disconnect from ASDM, save, and reconnect with the Cisco user. And then I'm going to enable command authorization from ASDM. So Cisco with Cisco. And now I can go on the SDM and also enable authorization for commands, because now I'm safe both the SDM. I'm authenticated on both the SDM and at the console with a TechX user, which allows me to type all commands on the ASA with no problem. Device management, and then I'm going to go to users AA, AA access, authorization, and enable command authorization against the TechX server with a fallback on local and say apply. Yes. So now I should still, with any problems, it says still authorization failed, because I have to get disconnected, probably. conf t. Let's say Cisco and Cisco. So it seems that somehow I still got locked out. Let's see why. So authentication HTTP console is correct. SSH console local, and then I typed in the authorization TACAC server local. Well, HTTP was only local database. That's the problem. And let's fix this from telnet from router 3. SSH minus TACAX user, TACAX user, TACAX user, enable Cisco. So this guy should be able to put in there disconnect one. Let's SSH from, I'm gonna explain what happened in a couple. Let's SSH with Cisco, with a user of Cisco, which should be granted full access to all commands. It is not because I forgot to configure on the ACS, of course, the authorization part. I'm going to explain this in a couple. Let me fix this up. Let's go on to the authorization part on the ACS. And for this zero rule, which has to do with the Cisco user, let's allow to the Cisco user access to all commands. All commands. And for the second rule, which is for the TACAX user, we're going to allow this user access to specific restricted commands. Let's configure this on the ACS, and we're going to fix everything up. Restricted commands. So the first step is going to be to go to customize and to go in here and enable and add the command set as an authorization option for my authorization policy. Say OK. Say save changes. Then I'm going to go to the zero rule, say edit, which that zero rule is for the Cisco user, because I said in here that this rules applies only if the authenticated user is Cisco. And I'm going to allow privilege level 15, and I'm going to allow access to all commands in there. So let's say remove, deselect this. Say select, and let's create a command set with all commands in there. I thought there was a default one. Let's go to policy elements and say device administration command sets, and create a set, say create, which says allow all commands. Allow all commands, which I'm going to say permit any command not listed in the table below, which means permit access to all commands. Submit. Let's go now to my access policy, to my authorization rule, edit my zero rule, which applies for the Cisco user. Let's say edit. And I'm going to, for this user, I'm going to give him access to all commands. Allow all commands. Say OK. And say OK. And save changes. So now I'm connected via SSH with a Cisco user. Show current priv, which now I should be granted access to all commands back and forth. And there we go, I do. And also now at the console, because I'm authenticated with the user of Cisco, I should likewise again get access to all commands. There we go. Let's make sure run AAA console ASDM access, ASDM authentication is via the TACAC server with the local. So likewise, if we connect now via ASDM, it should again work. And I will explain a couple why that is. I should be able to connect again via SDM. Continue. And there we go. So let me explain briefly what happened. So just to make sure that everybody is aware that before you enable that capability, which what that means is that at that point all commands configured on the ASA from the console, from SSH, from tenant, from SDM are going to get authorized against the attack server. Before you do that, you got to make sure that you are authenticated at the console or at VTI or via SDM with a username and password which allows for which the ACS server is going to allow you full access to your commands and is going to authorize you to privilege level 15. And once you have done that, so again, this command applies to all. This command is going to affect all commands being typed on the ASA. Doesn't matter from where. So now, based on my ACS config, so the problem was initially I lost access to both the console and to VTI lines configuration-wise and to ASDM because the ASA was configured for command authorization. So whatever I was doing on the ASA was sending a request. So when I sent from I was SSH, I was connected via the console of ASA3 with a user of CISCO. So when I was configuring, like I was putting in there with the console conft, ASA was sending that request to ACS1 saying, is user CISCO allowed to say conft on to configure to put that command in there? And the problem was that the ACS was not configured for command authorization properly, so that was a problem. So now based on my ACS configuration, because finally we get there, based on my ACS configuration, the user of CISCO is going to get the level of 15 assigned, and it has access to all commands. The TACAX user, the TACAX user, the other user from ACS, is going to get access to 15, of course, via enable as well, but it's going to get a restricted command access. Restricted command access. So let's say that, for example, that the TACAX user, what they can do on the ASA is, let's say, conft and router rep. So that's what I can do likewise as it was before. And network statements in there. If we go on the ACS server, in here, we want the second authorization rule to apply for that TACAX user to give him level 15 access and restricted command access.